Hello, everybody. Drop the microphone right up the back. So, okay. Let's see how we can do this situation. Hello. Happy Wednesday. I hope you join me. I'm going to do my absolute level best to read a little bit in a soothing tone. As I mentioned to a friend of mine, despite my layered, unusual accent that is somewhere between beach redneck and guy who moved to Tennessee, I will do everything I can. Hello, everybody, to make this a pleasant experience, maybe a little moment away from the madness, so to speak. We will certainly be going to halfway New York for a little visit. Halfway is known for a lot of things. One of the things we hadn't discussed was the trees. And I have kind of a weird thing. Hello. Hi. Hello, lovely. I have an odd fascination with trees that I'm not sure why. I don't know if I'm part Druid. I'm probably more Polish than anything else, but I've been fascinated with the American chestnut for quite some time. Hey, Philip, how you doing, man? And so that's the American chestnut is a huge component of this. And you're going to start to find out sort of why. We also get introduced today to somebody who is an unknown quantity in the story for the first time ever. I think based on the feedback that I'm getting back from you, hello, Clark family. I think I'm going to read some of the more dramatic scenes and then talk to you about it and read additional stuff from short stories as well every other week, just to keep things sort of lively and moving along. Although, how lively can this be? It's me sitting in my corner in between remodeling my house with a bunch of sleeping dogs and cats around me reading from a book. So in any case, let's go ahead and get started. We begin in chapter 3, A Tree Grows in the Forest, Duh. Look at this, I said to Glenna, who was busily slicing lemons. She's one of the servers and an unrepentant owner of the world's largest sweet tooth. At 50 years old, she was on her 4th or 5th set of teeth, we assumed, because she consumed exactly 2 food groups: coffee with sugar, and sugar combined with other ingredients that we called baked goods. Aside from those 2 items or varieties thereof, I think she draws her sustenance from the air. She's remarkably calm for someone who can drink 2 pots of coffee by herself during a shift. That much Java would have me twitching like a tuning fork held by a nervous weasel. I held out a slice of what we call bug toast, known to the rest of the universe as raisin bread. There were at least 2 dozen raisins crammed into this one humble slice, meaning that Lewis, the cook, had intentionally loaded that particular part of the loaf with extra goodies for Glenna. How he knew exactly when she would be slicing bug toast for early orders was beyond me. It was as if he was the Cassandra of dry fruit encased in bread, the difference being that we all believed he could see the future, since Glenna invariably was awarded the jackpot slices. With a cheery wave, she hailed Lewis and began to methodically shove the first slice into her mouth, despite standing at the counter amongst her customers. When someone had the temerity to call for more coffee, she gave them a baleful stare over her own mug before shoving the second slice into her mouth with a defiant flick of the wrist. Also me. Her brown eyes settled into something like fevered joy as she washed down the treats with wincing sips of coffee, then turned to her tables while patting her mouth delicately with a pilfered napkin. I smirked and began to walk back into the kitchen when I heard a voice, low but distinct, calling my name. Carly, right? I fixed on the origin of the question and found myself looking at a man comfortably placed at the end of the counter. How I missed him, I still don't know. He was in his late 20s, blonde, ropey like a runner, and dressed in the functional manner of all outdoorsmen who were more interested in actually being outside than talking about it. His eyes were dark brown, he had a mild tan, and his hair was cut short in what seemed to be a practical and damn the consequences sort of manner. He smiled at me half-heartedly until I raised a brow and acknowledged him. His big hands were curled around a coffee cup with a light touch, and he seemed to be taking my measure, but I wasn't offended. The candor in his eyes was refreshing. I get stared at occasionally. This was being recognized. Big difference. Yes, I let it hang. I wasn't going to help him. Plus, I was genuinely busy. It was 8:40 in the morning and the diner was jumping. Sorry, I put the cart before the introduction. Major Pickford, I'm told that we're neighbors, he said while holding out a hand. I shook it, then realized what he'd said. You're a major, or your name is Major? I asked. He didn't have that military vibe. He was squared away, but sort of loose, too. I liked it. No, not really, but yes, my name is Major. My mom was a music teacher. He grinned, clearly having told the story before. You got off easy. She could have named you Bassoon or Clef. I laughed, then snapped my fingers. Tammy, right? Wondering how he'd survive the I asked, wondering how he'd survive the onslaught of the patented Sincotti charm. We're going to get to Tammy, by the way. There's no way we can avoid Tammy. She is just like gravity. Hi, Jen. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for taking care of the teeth of people in Oregon. This ends our emotional outburst. The very same. He grimaced slightly, adding, she's rather a lot to take during one delivery. If I'd been drinking, I would have done a spit take for the ages. As it was, I snorted in the least ladylike way possible. He knew Tammy all right. Glad to see you weathered the storm, Carly. McEwen. I live 2 houses down. Nice to have you on the street, but I've got to get into the kitchen. Stop by sometime and I'll walk you across the village to show you the rough parts. A new guy doesn't want to end up on the wrong side of the tracks, I said ominously. Accepted. I would hate to see a hood in the Adirondacks. Bears going strapped? Perish the thought. He toasted me with his cup, and I walked back to my lair thinking that Tammy had excellent taste in men, at least this time. In case I haven't talked to you enough about Tammy, Tammy consumes men like I consume Oreo cookies. The difference being that my Oreo cookies don't talk back to me and they don't ever text me again. So Major was good as his word without coming off like a stalker. He achieved this state of approachability by lingering outside the diner for the end of my shift. He wore a charming smile, held flowers in one hand, and was busily eating a peanut butter sandwich. I know this because the odor clung to him like a memory go-round, and I found myself smiling back at him warmly. Hello, Carly McEwen. I hope this doesn't come off as desperate. It's why I decided to eat while I waited. That way you wouldn't think I'm chatting you up just in case to get closer to the diner's bakery case, he said, extending the flowers. I took them and realized that they were actually newly sprouted trees with tiny leaves. His grin was between impudent and charming. I regarded him with theatrical curiosity, then nodded as if he passed muster. I accept your reason for eating a peanut butter sandwich. It's certainly the most original approach I've seen. I smiled, then adopted a grave tone, adding, I also accept these tiny sprouts, but with the caveat that I don't really understand where you're going with this. He wiped his mouth thoughtfully. That's a bit more complicated than just wanting to meet a beautiful woman. Can we sit? I waved at a strip of grass between 2 buildings. It looked out over the lake that was more park than property divider. When we'd assumed matching positions of comfort, legs extended towards the water, he pointed towards the northwest. You know the name Tyler Venture? Did I ever? Of course, I said with some disgust. It took us a year to get rid of his so-called groupies and fans, if that's what you want to call them. Tyler Venture was an internet sensation who parlayed his fame into the single most damaging event in our county's history. Born Todd Smulowitz to an upper-class family in Long Island, he created an online persona who went on so-called urban safaris, inexplicably gaining him about 1 billion hits on YouTube. Todd was many things, but stupid wasn't one of them. When the iron was hot, he convinced a cable network to sponsor actual safaris to places of wild danger, none of which he was qualified for. He had a minimal understanding of the land, little or no common sense, and the finest gear that money could buy. Fortunately, someone at his network thought a dry run for the show was a good idea. They arranged for him to discover an old cabin in the heart of the Adirondacks. I could feel my blood beginning to heat at the arrogance of that decision. The Adirondacks are 5.5 million acres, much of it in the state it was in when the Europeans first arrived here 3 centuries ago. You could take a wrong turn and walk for 2 weeks without hitting a major road. That assumes you don't die from exposure first. Tyler, had a handheld camera, 2 days worth of food, and a vague idea of which way the sun rose. His entry point, to my disgust, was less than half a mile from my house on a trail that was well used and presumed safe, or at least relatively safe. In less than 4 hours, he was lost. We know this because the fool documented his stupidity for all the world to see, and it uploaded upon his discovery by some of the 2,000 volunteers who pummeled the woods looking for him. You'd have thought Amelia Earhart was in halfway with the crush of press and young women swelling our population. I cooked more egg white omelets in that week than I ever have in my entire life. To this day, I hear the words gluten free and I want to punch the nearest city girl taking a selfie in front of my grill. Todd was located, feted, and then ridiculed. He eventually vanished from the media conscience down the memory hole where every stupid mistake goes to die. I do. What does that clown have to do with your presence here? I asked archly. Major's status just dropped to that of a buck private by simple association. He held up both hands in a defensive posture. I think he's a tool. Don't shoot the messenger. All right. No guns. For now, I allowed. I said nothing of spells. Major scrolled through his phone and found a picture. It was one of the seemingly limitless selfies that Tyler the Wonder Dork had uploaded to his website during the week following what he described as his heroic victory over nature. Hi, Joy. Never mind that it was a glorified walk in the woods with some minor discomfort. He milked the entire event for all it was worth. Until people turned on him, then he vanished again into a sea of nobodies, his status as a permanent joke cemented by his own vanity. I looked at the picture. There was Tyler's goofy face with some serious scruff going on. He couldn't even really grow a proper beard. Tyler, a sort of handsome guy, looked like he had a mild case of mange, and there were deep circles under his eyes that bespoke some hard nights. I felt a twinge of regret at my disdain for him, then pushed that back down. He deserved it, the dumbass, and after all, he had survived. The picture seemed unremarkable. He stood in the shadow of a modest stone hillside that opened to one of thousands of ravines that carved the park. It was lush and green. Overhead, giant trees towered upward and cast dappled shadows across his face. It must have been late afternoon when he took the snap. The undergrowth covered something that might have been a collapsed rock pile. The boulders receded into the brush until they were lost. I give up. It looks like Tyler's in the woods. I've seen hundreds of these. He's in love with his own face. My disgust was apparent because Major adjusted the screen to focus on the trees behind Tyler, leaving the top of his head visible in the lower left corner. Take a look at these trees here, he instructed, pointing at a row of massive straight trunks that soared up out of the camera's field of vision. There were several of them growing together, but distinctly apart. They were different than anything else in the picture, and their bark seemed like it was incredibly old. Even from the limits of Tyler's cell phone camera, I got the impression of majesty. I think I'm going to read one more paragraph and then call it an evening. Something tickled at the limits of my imaginations, and I turned to regard Major with a critical eye, realizing I didn't know anything about this man who was asking me some rather unusual questions. I stared hard for a second, then asked, "What do you do for a living?" I folded my hands and sat back to wait. Being quiet is often far better than asking questions. As a witch, I know that the silence is filled with secrets. And we'll stop there. I have a fascination with giant trees, as I mentioned, and the American chestnut. About 4 billion of them were killed by a rare disease that swept through around the turn of the century, 120 years ago. And that's sort of what got me interested thematically in bringing this into this. And I failed to mention earlier, but I hope everybody's okay. This has been a very chaotic week on top of chaotic weeks prior to that. But I am focusing on a lot of good things noticeably 12 kittens that are, we have multiple litters of kittens around here that I'm in the process of sort of bringing into the fold so that they can be handled and medicated and rescued and things like that. Yeah, the silence. Oh well, the silence is filled with secrets. One of the things that you notice that your parents may have done to you, and if you become a parent, you realize that if you just sit in front of your kid and don't say anything, eventually they're going to crack. I mean, look, we know this. And if you stare at them with anything like a reasonably warm look, they're going to crack. So the silence is, in fact, filled with secrets if you're only still enough to listen to them. So I hope everybody is wonderful. I got something very exciting today. I got the first posters printed of our book covers. I will be posting pictures of them later tonight, I think. They are magnificent. I am so stoked. I will be giving some of them away. The other thing that came into my life that I'm really thankful for is I found a bunch of pictures going back all the way to the 1930s from my family. Um, it's incredible. For one thing, I am an absolute clone of my mother and a clone of my grandmother and my great grandmother and my grandfather. I'm just a clone. There's just lots of dark, swarthy Polish people going right down the line. So I'm going to start a thread where we're going to post some old family pictures and stuff on it and do a random giveaway based on that on the website. And I guess that's it for now. I've been yapping for 16 minutes. That's enough. Thank you very much for joining me. Tell your friends, bring them around if you can, if they like books. I am absolutely open to read other stuff too, just to get us away from everything for a few minutes, if only for a few minutes. So thank you for joining me. I will talk to you soon. Bye.